Good morning and welcome to Belpre Naz Online. What an exciting time of year it is. We've got so many events coming up. We just started pushing all the details for events coming up in July and in August. We've got our district camp meeting coming up July 14th through the 21st. We've got community events. We're going to be a part of the Belpre Homecoming Parade. We've got just tons of opportunities. We're going to have a community cookout to end the summer and bring in the school year. And then at the very end of August, beginning of September, we are going to have a revival. We're going to have a 3-day revival, a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Sunday morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a picture of our bulletin from Sunday. I'm going to post that in the comments so that you can pull that up. It's going to be like a digital version of our paper bulletin that we put out every week. But we're gonna post that so that you can get all of the details for events that we have coming up. We've got all the dates, the times, the locations, everything you need is in this bulletin. So I really encourage you to dig into that, to look at that bulletin a little bit and start adding things to your calendar. I think it's really special when a church family, when a community begins to prioritize the life of the church over the busyness of life. We're not trying to be busy for the sake of being busy. We're trying to provide opportunities to build community within Belpre Church of the Nazarene, but also to build community with our community of Belpre, Ohio. And these events, these community events, these fellowship opportunities, these service opportunities are a really great way to continue to build this connection and this unity. So I pray that you will prioritize this, that you will add it to your calendar, and you will join us for as many things as possible. I'm not naive. I realize that we're still going to be busy and not everyone can make it to everything, and I completely respect that and I understand it. But I would ask you to just prioritize as much as you can, come to as many things as you can, and just continue to build into the community of Belpre Church of the Nazarene. Well, I hope you enjoy this sermon. I hope it challenges you. I hope it encourages you. And I hope that it stirs something new in your heart. If you have any questions, comments, prayer requests, just want to connect, please feel free to leave a message on our Facebook page, to drop a comment on this video, or to just email me, call me, whatever you want to do. We want to help you get connected. We want to help you stay connected. So here at Belpre Church of the Nazarene, we are excited about our summer. We're excited about the next several months. We're excited about our future. And we hope you'll all be a part of that. So have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
I want to begin this morning with a story. A story about a person who I'm going to venture to say many of you have never heard of. But I guarantee that all of us have benefited from this man's life. This is the story of Ignaz Semmelweis. In the 1840s, was working at the obstetrician clinic in Vienna General Hospital, not our Vienna, the one in Europe. And at the time, it was common for women to die of puerperal fever or childbed fever shortly after they gave birth. The mortality rate was extremely and alarmingly high, and the cause of this fever was completely unknown to the doctors. They couldn't figure out what was happening. Well, Semmelweis, observing this, he looked at the clinic and he was noticing that where medical students and doctors were performing autopsies as well as procedures, those places had a significantly higher mortality rate of this childbed fever compared to clinics that were staffed by midwives. So, and the midwives do not perform autopsies on people that are deceased. His hypothesis was that cadaverous particles from the autopsies were being transferred to the birthing women by the doctors and the students, the particles under their nails and things like that, because they did not believe that you had to wash your hands from one person to the next. They would go from an autopsy to deliver a child. To test his theory, Semmelweis instituted a policy requiring that all medical personnel had to wash their hands with a chlorinated lime solution before examining patients after doing autopsies. And the results were dramatic, to say the least. the mortality rate in doctors' clinics plummeted from about 18% mortality to 3% mortality. So if we look at this in terms of 2,000 births over the course of time, that statistic would change the mortality rate from 360 mothers to only 60 mothers dying from childbirth due to this fever, this infection. But despite the clear success of his methods, Semmelweis, he faced intense opposition from the general medical community. Many doctors were offended by the implication that they were ultimately responsible for the deaths of their patients, and additionally, the prevailing medical theory of the time said that germs were not a real thing. There were not particles from one person that would go to another. And so this concept of infection transmission was thought to be a myth. It was thought to be just a false theory. So Semmelweis' ideas were largely ignored and actually ridiculed during his lifetime. He struggled to get his findings published, and he even faced professional ostracism. Nobody would hire the guy who said you had to wash your hands. He was frustrated. He was disillusioned. His mental health actually deteriorated to the point where he became committed to an asylum and would die in 1865 at the age of 47 years old. Years after his death became the advent of germ theory, when doctors realized that maybe germs could possibly be real. But it was years after his discovery. This was championed by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister, and it validated Semmelweis' work. Today, he's actually recognized as a pioneer in antiseptic procedures, and his contributions have saved countless lives. Think of the number of women that have given birth from the 1840s to today in 2024. His story highlights the impact of preconceived notions and resistance to new ideas, despite clear evidence supporting his methods, his practices, his experiments showed that he was on the right path. These entrenched beliefs and pride of his contemporaries delayed the acceptance of this life-saving practice. Imagine the mothers whose lives could have been saved in the years between his discovery and the acceptance of his discovery. It serves as a reminder of the importance to openness and humility in the face of new innovation and evidence. It shows us that when we hold on to preconceived notions and don't allow for new ideas, or for a person to show us they've changed, or if we hold on too tightly to what we've always done and we don't allow any other ideas to come in, we can miss something awesome. We can miss something major. So this morning I want to read through the passage, and let's see a time where preconceived notions actually held Jesus back from being able to fulfill his work and purpose in a community. So we're going to be reading out of the book of Mark, chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. And it reads, Jesus left there and went to his hometown, Nazareth, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these great things, they asked. What's this wisdom that's been given to him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense to him. Jesus said to them, a prophet is without honor except in his own town. A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. He could not do any miracles there except lay hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village. Calling the 12 to him, He began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. Take nothing for your journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but don't bring an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, you stay there until you leave that town. And if that place will not welcome or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. Now, a lot of times when we hear this message preached, people approach it from this perspective of us as the church being the Jesus in the story or being the disciples in the story. And we like to lean heavy into that one verse, into verse 11. If any place doesn't welcome or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. Because the church is really happy when Jesus finally gives us an excuse to get rid of the people that aren't listening to us, to get rid of the people that are battling against us or are annoying us. And so the church generally clings on to this message and says, thankfully, Jesus gave us an opportunity to say, you're not worth my time. I'm going to move on down the road. And there's great value in that message. And I don't take anything away from the words of Jesus, but I would like to present a different perspective this morning, especially for us as Nazarenes. It seems fitting for us to put ourselves in the shoes of the Nazarenes in the story. Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, that is where the Nazarenes resided. That is where we kind of get our namesake, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But let me put us in the perspective of being the Nazarenes this morning. So Jesus comes into town, and we knew Jesus. We saw him grow up. We saw him go into the temple and teach the older people years before he should have been able to. We saw him running around, probably saw him fall and bump his leg or cry or, do something dumb like kids do. He probably did those things. So we watched this kid grow up. But he comes to town, and we're really, really excited. Verse 2 says, in these first two verses, when he comes into the town and begins teaching in the synagogue, the people are a little bit excited about what is happening. They've heard the stories about what Jesus had done in other places. They had heard all those testimonies and those stories, and now he's back in his hometown, so they're excited. And they begin to talk about where he could have learned all these things and how could he have all of this wisdom built in him. This is little Jesus. We know little Jesus. But then their mindset, our mindset begins to change a little bit, right? It goes from, oh man, this is super cool, to, hang on, is this actually true? This is just Jesus. This is Mary's son. This is the brother of Joseph and James and Simon. We know his sisters. They're from our town. We know who he is. The Nazarenes begin to let the experiences that they'd had with Jesus in the past and what they knew about him growing up, not these bad things, but just seeing him as a child, as an adolescent, that's all they could picture about Jesus. They allowed these preconceived notions to become powerful and influence their willingness to take what Jesus had to say to heart. They realized that they knew his kinfolk, his brothers, his sisters, and how that family could produce anything like Jesus would be impossible. I don't know because the scripture doesn't say, but I can almost imagine that the people of Nazareth may have seen Jesus as possibly a con man, as a false prophet coming in to share this message, but they're like, there's no way he's that special. He's just from Nazareth. Maybe they saw him as a snake oil salesman kind of thing, or maybe they even took it a step further and they're like, oh, he must be empowered by an evil spirit. That wouldn't be the first time that's said. The Pharisees had accused Jesus of the same thing. Oh, this can't be real. This has to be an evil spirit. And evil is using this to confuse the people and lead them astray. Whatever their reasoning, they take offense to Jesus. The phrase they took offense to him would mean that they were scandalized or almost caused to stumble by the presence of Jesus. They couldn't possibly understand how this little boy had grown up to be this powerful Messiah. They just couldn't let their minds get past it. Their preconceived notions about Jesus as a carpenter's son, a common man without formal religious training, led them to dismiss his authority and divine mission. This reaction is highlighting their unbelief and their inability to see past their limited understanding of Jesus' identity. And what does that lead to? Well, in verse 5, the result of this unbelief is that Jesus could not do any miracles there. Their lack of faith from the Nazarenes pushed Jesus out of town and led him to not be able to fulfill the blessing that he had come to offer to his people, to his hometown. He could not give them everything that he wanted to give them before he had to leave them behind and move on. See, the lack of faith of the Nazarenes made them ineligible to receive this blessing of God because they were too busy thinking of ways that Jesus couldn't be the Messiah and missed out on the opportunity to accept him for who he really was, the Messiah. So what does this teach us about how we live our lives today? It honestly always makes me uncomfortable to preach on the Nazarenes because I just can't help but put myself in their shoes. That's who we have come to identify ourselves with as a denomination. That's our namesake. And the prevailing ideology about the people from Nazareth is that nothing good could come from there. The irony is that the very people who are placing these preconceived notions on Jesus are the very people who are burdened by the exact same preconceived notions of the world on themselves. If we look at the first chapter of John, when Jesus is calling Philip and Nathanael to be disciples, and Philip is called and he approaches Nathanael and he says, "We found him, we found the Messiah. It's a man from Nazareth." Nathanael's response to him was, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth?" And this is the general perception of the Jewish people of the world toward the Nazarenes. Nazareth was a small, insignificant town in Galilee, and it didn't have a great reputation. Nathanael's response shows a common prejudice or skepticism toward that town, suggesting it was not expected to produce something or someone as significant as the Messiah. Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? So this is one of the preconceived notions that is laid on Jesus, that because of where he grew up, he can't be who he says he is. Another issue that Jesus kind of battles against when it comes to preconceived notions would be the messianic expectations that are placed on him. On top of the prejudice against Nazareth, he had to go against this idea that many Jews had at the time, that the Messiah would have to come from a prominent place, would have to grow up in a place like Bethlehem that has strong messianic associations due to the prophecies. The idea of the Messiah coming from Nazareth just did not fit in with the ideologies that the people had. Now, we know the story. We know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Jesus did fulfill those prophecies, but he was also a refugee that had to flee to Egypt to hide and be rescued, and then he came back to Nazareth where he grew up and lived his life. Nazareth. Nothing good can come from Nazareth. That's actually where we get our church name. When Phineas Brzee was forming this new church idea that was focused on the quote-unquote less thans, the addicts, the prostitutes, the single moms, the orphans, widows, things like that. He had this idea, and he said, well, culture has cast us out. The world has cast us out, so why don't we become Nazarenes? Because surely nothing good can come from Nazareth, right? See, we believe that good things do come from Nazareth. We know that Jesus came from Nazareth, and we know that he was the Messiah. So we know that great things come from Nazareth. But the world views Nazareth, the world views the less thans as just that. Less than worthy, less than to spend their time and their effort on them. Preconceived notions were prevailing, and the people are not allowing new information or experience with Jesus to enlighten them to a new perspective. That's the story that we read out of Mark. We see the Nazarenes welcoming Jesus at first, and then allowing their experiences to influence them to push Jesus away. Now, it is my belief that in our modern society, we have a very similar problem. We have a lot of preconceived notions ourselves, and I'm sure that you would all agree with that to some point. So today I want to talk about some of these preconceived notions that we can get rid of, that we can push away and see what amazing thing God has in store. A good place to start, we could potentially let go of our preconceived notions about God. Who here has ever prayed a prayer, a very specific prayer, that said, God, I need you to show up at 3 p.m. on Friday because I have a test and I don't want to fail it? Well, you're adults, not teens, so maybe you haven't had that recently. But we've all had these moments where we demand a lot out of God, and we demand very specific responses to our prayers. We demand very specific directions and plans in our life, and when God does not answer those, we begin to develop this sort of distrust sometimes for God. We think, well, you didn't come through how I expected you to come through this time, so why would I expect you to come through next time the right way? See, I think one of the preconceived notions that we have about God is that he's kind of like a genie in a bottle, that we command him around, that we can dictate the way that he's going to interact with our lives. And the amazing thing is he allows us to pray that way. He says, share your thoughts, share your heart. His mind can be changed, and he shows us that in Scripture. But one thing we must understand, what Isaiah teaches us in chapter 55 of his book, it says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. See, God often works in unexpected ways. Our limited understanding can cause us to miss his blessings because we believe if God does not do it the exact way that we ask him to do it, then it can't be done. Then that prayer cannot be answered. But I'm here to tell you that you can let go of that preconceived notion because God works in very different ways to the way we would have him work. There are times when our prayers and our thoughts are answered in ways that we would expect, but more often than not, I feel as though God works in a way that doesn't make sense in the moment, but as we look back on it, we realize, oh, that's what you were doing. That's where you were heading. I see what you were doing. Our limited understanding causes us to miss his blessings. We have to trust in God's greater wisdom and plan, even when it doesn't align with our expectations, even when it doesn't make sense to us and what we are thinking. We need to let go of some preconceived notions about other people. 1 Samuel 16 tells us, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. We need to begin seeing people through God's eyes, beyond their backgrounds, beyond their appearances, beyond their political affiliations, beyond their football affiliations. Chris? We have to find a way to get over our first reactions to people. I have a feeling that the first time some of you met me, you were probably like, this dude is way too young. He's way too green. He doesn't know enough to come and be our senior pastor, right? I'm a young guy. You can be honest. It's fine. Thankfully, I was awarded the opportunity to continually show myself and to show you who I am and to show you the ways that God has grown me in specific ways to be prepared to step into this position and continue to grow. But I hope that you see that we can't allow the first reaction to be the thing that stops us from doing great things. I know some really amazing people that work on the periphery of ministry. By that I mean They don't feel like they can work in the church, so they do good things for the community or outside of the church, kind of working with the church, but not directly with them, because they have things like tattoos on their neck or tattoos on their face or a lot of piercings on their body, or maybe they wear clothes that don't really match what they think is a Sunday morning attire, which I think we don't care about those things. But there's this expectation that we do care about those things, because there have been times where the church has allowed those physical appearances to outweigh people and their personalities and how we are called to love them. We have to find ways to get rid of the preconceived notions about other people. We have to find ways to let go of preconceived notions about the church. Ephesians 3:20-21 says, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us." See, the church is not just a building or a tradition. It's the living body of Christ. It urges us to be open to new ways where God might work through the church to impact the community and the world. See, I think the church gets comfortable. We do something, and it works for a while, and we see great success, but then eventually it stops working so well. Culture changes, society changes, whatever it is, and it doesn't work. But it worked once, so we have to keep doing it that way, because that's how God impacted our community. This kind of ties back into getting rid of these preconceived notions about God. He works in new ways, in different ways, for different people, in different ages, in different generations. So we have to be willing to let the church evolve. We have to be willing to let the church grow into something new with the solidity of our doctrine and our theology. These are things that don't change, but sometimes the appearance changes, sometimes the music changes, sometimes the people in the church change, and we need to be willing to accept that, to embrace that, and see what thing God is going to do with it. Here's the last one, but one that I really want to lean into this morning. We need to let go of the preconceived notions that we carry about ourselves. We need to limit ourselves based on our past, on our perceived abilities, or on our past failures. Well, I want to be the one today to tell you that Christ has a plan for you, which is greater than anything you can ask or imagine, as I just read in Ephesians. I want you to imagine the stories of Moses, who stood before God and said, "I can't speak in public." And God made a way, and Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt and led them through the desert as they were going to enter into the promised land. He's one of the forefathers of our faith. I want you to think of the story of David, who was the youngest, the smallest, the weakest, the least manly of all of his mighty, strong, tall brothers. And yet when Samuel walked in, he walked down the line and he said, "No, no, no, no." And the last that he saw was David, and he said, "This is the one that God is anointing." I want you to think of the story of Abraham, who was too old to have the children that God had promised him. I want you to think of the story of Paul, who began his adult life persecuting the church of Christ, killing Christians and killing people that declared Christ as God, and then would devote the rest of his life to the gospel and would ultimately die for the gospel. See, God sees our limitations, and he raises us a blessing. He raises us with something amazing when we're willing to walk headstrong into the things that we see as our biggest weaknesses, as our biggest inabilities. God blesses that effort, and he makes a way for us to go crashing through that wall into whatever it is that he has called us to, whatever it is that he has ordained for us. He blesses it when we are willing to say, "You are stronger than what I think about myself." See, I personally lived this out. I knew I was called into ministry for a very long time. When I was a little kid, my mom said, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "Well, I'm either going to be an army man or I'm going to be a cowboy." And then a couple years later, She said, what are you going to be? And I said, well, I'm going to be a pastor in the Marine Corps because my uncle was a Marine. I thought that was cool. And I said, I'm going to be a pastor in the Marine Corps. See, I knew as a kid that I was called into ministry, but I got beat down by life. I let the failures of my life, I let my inadequacies keep pushing me down to the point when I reached high school, I was such a shell of who I had been when I was a kid. I had lost everything that made me me because I was so afraid to fail. I had no identity. I had no personality. I had nothing that was truly me left because I was hiding everything for fear of failure. When I began to hear from God and he said, I'm going to make you a pastor, I was like Moses. I said, no, I don't speak in front of people. That is not me, God. I don't speak in front of people. My junior year of high school, I got elected unanimously behind my back by my peers to be the president of an organization in our school called Skills USA. I was in trade school, and what that meant is that I had to go up and give a speech in front of about 2,000 of my peers, and I was petrified. I walked up, and I was so scared I could hardly get my first word out, and then my throat went dry, and I began to cough, and I was just so uncomfortable. I mustered my way through. I made my way through this circumstance. And after that, I said, see, God, I don't speak in front of people. About 3 months later, through this process of growth, I ended up standing in front of a group of judges and about 500 people, and I did something called extemporaneous speech, which means that I was handed a topic, which was a quote from JFK, and I had 5 minutes to come up with a 5-minute speech on this topic. And I walked out with more confidence than I've ever had in my life, and I stood in front of this group of people, and I stood in front of these judges, and I gave a 5-minute speech that made absolutely no sense, and I failed miserably. But I did it with so much confidence, and as I walked off the stage, I said, I see you, God. I see what you just did there. He broke through this wall because I was willing to allow it to happen. I was willing to be a part of this process. He broke through this wall that I felt held me back from being worth anything to him, from being worth anything to his church. And this is what it all culminates in. At the end of this passage today in Mark, which would be verses 7 through 13, it tells us how Jesus was sending out the 12 disciples. He would send them 2 by 2, and he told them to go with no provisions, no bread, no money, no extra clothes. Just take a staff and another guy, and you go into a town, and you make it happen. And he said, when they don't accept you, you walk away. That's fine. But when they do accept you, you're going to be driving out demons. You're going to be healing people. You're going to be preaching the gospel. You're going to be changing hearts. You're going to be changing minds. But every single one of his disciples came from backgrounds that did not make them prepared to be preachers, prepared to be healers, prepared to be evangelists. They were fishermen, tax collectors, people like that. Their skill set did not match what Jesus was sending them out to be. But what Jesus had done is he'd taken hold of all these inadequacies that they held of themselves, and he pushed them out, and he said, we're going to do something great. Now I want us to begin to imagine today that if we would embrace this sending the way that Jesus gives it to the disciples, saying, I want you to go out on faith with nothing more than the bare essentials that you need, which I'm telling you, you already have the bare essentials. If you know Jesus and you trust in him, that's all you need to step out into this world and to be an amazing blessing, to do something absolutely great and amazing by pushing through all the preconceived notions, not allowing the world to shut you down, not allowing other people to shut you down, not allowing yourself to shut you down, and not holding God back. When we step into this, when we have a willingness to let go of our own ideas and allow God's power to run through us, great things are going to happen.